I'm not one to complain without a solution. So I offered a solution in the event that people don't want this to not pass. Some of you may have seen it here. Where do I have that? Do I have that? I don't believe I do have that. So some of you may have seen, let me bring up my notes again. Some of you may have seen my commentary on that at the town council meeting, because I didn't offer my commentary until after the public hearing was over and at the town council meeting. But here's the commentary that kind of sums up my solution. Mike Sennello, 111 Willow Springs. So I should have actually spoken during the hot work permit public hearing. In 5B 24A, hot work defined. The final line out of context says any similar applications producing or using sparks, flame, or heat. So it lists a number of the processes there. Welding and allied processes. These use heat. That's what the arc does, is it creates heat and melts metal. Heat treating, grinding, thawing pipes, powder-driven fasteners. These are your ram sets. Hot riveting, which I don't imagine we're ever going to get here in New Milford. Torch-applied roofing, which is open flame. Pipe sweating, which is open flame. Any other similar application producing or using sparks. So the recommendation I would make would be to strike the words producing or from that final line, because if that's going to be the case, then the reason that any form of cutting metal, which is not strictly mechanical, is going to produce sparks. They may be for so short a burst that you'll never see them, and they may not be hot enough to actually set anything in building materials on fire, which is what the purpose of the permit is for. So for example, we just had the gutters done here on this building. Those gutters have downspouts. I can assure you they were cut on site. I can assure you that because of the age of the building, they were cut on site. This is done with an angle grinder like this, that fast. So for something like that, that seems kind of overkill, especially if you're working on a sidewalk over concrete. To have to pay a guy, that means every roofer who's going to get a commercial job is going to have somebody there. Every roofer who gets a commercial job who's doing these gutters and downspouts, they're going to have to apply for this permit. They're going to have to wait to finish these gutter processes to get the approval of this permit. So the way you fix that is to just simply say using sparks, flame, or heat. So in the case of a powder-driven fastener, you're using the rapid expansion of gas created by that 22 shell. It's not a full 22 shell, but you're using the powder that's being ignited by the primer. Rapid expansion of gas, that heat is what projects the nail usually into concrete, well, through wood and into concrete. So I would say that to alleviate a number of Ms. Ram's concerns, all you'd have to do is strike 2 words from this thing, and that would significantly tone down the language of the permits so that we're not having something, again, like downspouts being cut by angle grinders. Yes, they're aluminum in almost every single case. In the case of cutting aluminum, you're probably not going to see the sparks because, again, they burn so quickly and they burn so, the temperature is so low compared to cutting steel, for example, that you're probably not even going to see it. It's going to be an instantaneous flash. So that's my recommendation for the hot work permit. Just striking those 2 words from 5B 24A. So I did upload this onto my YouTube channel. You guys can see that right there where it says simply strike these 2 words. So if you guys ever want to go revisit that, you can. Making sure that I have my audio turned down for all of that. Yeah. So the point that I'm bringing up here is that is that by changing those 2 words, just those 2 words, by removing just those 2 words, and I'm actually going to double down on this because Cosgrove and I had a conversation about that. By removing just those 2 words, it becomes significantly less restrictive, right? If you're talking about a part of the construction process that produces heat, belt sanders produce heat. You could just be sanding down a little bit of excess spackle. That's going to produce heat. You could be if you've got metal studs like I do here in my office, and you're trying to hang things from metal studs. Let's say you're doing the right thing, which these guys didn't do, and putting a backer board onto those metal studs behind the sheetrock. Then you're going to have to drill into those metal studs. Drilling into the metal studs is going to produce heat. That's completely ridiculous to have to apply for a hot work permit for something like that. So the example that Chris and I brought up was what happens if you're angle grinding, if you're grinding down, say, a weldment
on a steel structure? Well, first things first, if you're going to be doing that with a weldment, then you're going to have to apply for the hot work permit anyways, because what we're talking about is using the heat in the first place. I don't think you should have to apply for a hot work permit unless unless what it is, unless the thing you're doing is by its very nature using that heat. The point of the thing is the heat, right? It's not a secondary feature that happens by pure happenstance to be a product of the thing. Again, this could, if you wanted to, we talked about drills, we talked about belt sanders. If you wanted to be a thermodynamics dick about it, then part of what allows the drill to turn at all is an electric motor that uses the arcing process to spin that motor. And technically there's a microscopic arc inside all electric motors, which means literally every battery powered power tool on Earth is going to wind up requiring a hot work permit if you're going to be a thermodynamics dick about it. And again, I get Kevin Reynolds is probably not going to be a thermodynamics dick about it, but Kevin Reynolds is who is there now. And you don't do this for who is there now. You do these things on principle, right? So it doesn't matter that Kevin Reynolds is not a dick. In 50 years' time, you could get somebody who's a dick and has a neighbor that built a fence that's too tall and the two neighbors don't get along and that fire marshal doesn't like it. No, you're going to get the fire marshal's going to come in and whack this guy with fines and halt the entire process because there's a guy using a drill and it has an electric motor. And if you want to be a thermodynamics dick about it, that winds up producing spark. Just about everything you do that involves friction. In fact, literally everything you do that involves friction that doesn't have an outside cooling process is going to wind up producing heat. Having hand warmers in your boots is going to wind up producing heat, right? So I talked about how, you build these things on principle. And on that matter, as to my thoughts on the matter, you oppose these things on principle. Or at least you do things like I suggested and amend them on principle, on principle, and to not drive away business. And in doing so, you restore consent of the governed. You restore mutual consent in all transactions.